Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Empower Your Teen. I'm Emma B. Perez. Today, we're going to be focusing on traveling during a gap year, and I've brought in one of the best to discuss this topic with us, Marion Taylor. Marion Taylor is a GYA accredited gap year counselor and founder of Taylor the Gap. She brings over 35 years of social work experience, as well as parenting 4 gap year children herself. She serves on the board of the Gap Year Association and as a keynote speaker at USA Gap Year Fairs. Marion, thank you so much for being here with us today.
I'm glad to be here.
All right, so let's get right into it. This is all about how to spend a gap year. And we're talking with people about lots of different ways they can do that. And I'm so glad that you're here to talk about traveling. But first, I would like you to share with us how you came to be a gap year advisor. How did you get into this business?
So about 10 years ago, I was between jobs and I had an opportunity to kind of reflect and recalibrate a little bit. I had always worked for someone and I was entering probably the last few years before empty nest syndrome. And I really decided I wanted to be in control of my own business. So I took the time to interview Colorado high school college counselors all over the state to learn if they needed this kind of service for them. Gap year college counselors have a lot on their plate. They have usually a full caseload, and all but one encouraged me to start this business because they were really looking for an expertise like this so that they could refer parents and students who were looking, yes, they're going to go to college, but they were looking to do a gap year, but the poor counselors have no bandwidth to be able to learn about that and explore it themselves. So they were eager to be able to refer to a counselor. And then I also learned that I am the only gap year counselor between Chicago and California. So I felt like I really had a geographical niche. So I attended a couple gap fairs and learned from a very established gap year counselor who'd been doing it for about 20 years. I also visited a lot of the gap programs. And over the course of about a year, I put together a website and started up. It combined my passion and love for travel, for language learning, for Africa, and also just being able to be my own boss and to start up a business and control my own hours and working one-on-one with women, children, and families.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that story. So there are lots of ways that a young person can spend their gap year. And I would like to spend a moment talking about the benefits of traveling during a gap year. So what are some of the things that a young person can get out of travel?
Well, I honestly believe that getting outside your comfort zone is one of the best things that a student can do in terms of broadening their perspective and learning about themselves. And that can be domestically, it can be within the United States, but to get outside their own community. That could be disaster relief from Puerto Rico. It could be working at a Native American Indian Pine Ridge Reservation up in North Dakota. There are a number of things we can do stateside. And if you are lucky enough to be able to travel internationally, there is so much that can be learned from other cultures, from other religions, from other value systems, from other mores, other food. And if a student is lucky enough to be able to travel to a country that is developing, not a Western country such as Australia or New Zealand or Europe, which is very Western, very similar to ours. But if they are able to travel to, say, Nepal, Vietnam, Senegal, to a country that doesn't have such a high standard of living, I think it's very, very eye-opening for the students. They really realize, wow, look how the majority of the world lives. And they come back with a huge appreciation for our standard of living here, our 24-hour access to the internet, the hot running water that comes out of the faucets, the washing machines, our functional infrastructure, whether it's the post office or whether it be our airports. And I think that sense of appreciation is huge. But also, I think we can learn so much from other cultures. During my time in Peace Corps in Africa, I learned what the sense of community is. Everything is working together, whether it be harvesting the field or whether babysitting each other's children or down in Peru, what it's like for a women's co-op to work weeding and selling their own products, to the work ethic involved in other countries as well. And I think so much can be learned in terms of other cultures. And from that, it's incumbent on us to train our new upcoming leaders that are juniors, seniors, college students that are going to be leading our nonprofits, our corporations, or maybe even going into government public service, because we can then have them integrate this perspective to develop empathy and cultural sensitivity, which we know is vital in our leaders. And it also makes you so much more culturally sensitive. I find myself in the airport or even in my own city, if I see a family of foreigners and they're struggling with the language or they can't read the sign, I am much more likely now to go up to them and try to help them because I have been in their shoes in their country or a foreign country where I've been lost or struggling. And I think that is really, really important. So there's so many advantages to traveling.
Yes, I completely agree with you. You know, we are more and more a global society, and most young people will grow up, and whatever they end up doing, there's a chance they're going to have some interaction in their profession internationally. And so having that experience, having that exposure, and like you said, being more culturally sensitive is only going to be a benefit, especially in our children's future. So I love that. Thank you. Okay, so I know that there are different kinds of travel available to young people. Can you tell us about them?
There is a wide range of opportunities, and that can be for high school students that are within high school. They can do a foreign exchange program, live with a family overseas for a semester or a year, or there can be specifically gap year age programs as well for 17, 18, 19-year-olds. And then there are programs study abroad for college students. And then I am working more and more with post-college students that say perhaps want to get into grad school and need some medical experience shadowing, or perhaps they want to go into law. So they might do a legal internship of some sort, whether that be locally or whether it be overseas. And generally, I recommend 4 weeks as a minimum for any sort of gap experience, especially for language. 4 weeks is not very long, but it takes about 2 weeks to adjust to the culture, to the food, to your surroundings. So I always recommend a minimum of 4 weeks. United Kingdom programs tend to be shorter term than American ones. They tend to range from about 4 to 12 weeks. They're a little bit more flexible in terms of the start and stop time. They tend to be a little bit more international, not just American students, tend to be a little bit cheaper. Many of them are subsidized by the government, and a mix of ages. The American programs, there's a wide range from working here in the US, some that most people are familiar with: Student Conservation Corps, AmeriCorps, City Year. City Year, you can work in 23 cities around America, the inner cities. And all three of those, a student is paid monthly stipend to help defray room and board, but they also receive about a $6,100 educational stipend called the Siegel Award at the end. But for programs that are international, American programs tend to be a little bit more structured, run 10 to 12 weeks, so usually a full semester. And they usually include a portion of travel, usually 1 or 2 or 4 homestays, usually an enrichment piece, and that could be visiting Angkor Wat or climbing Machu Picchu or seeing the Taj Mahal. And it also usually has a language study component, so at least the students will learn the greetings, as well as sort of a cultural immersion type of thing where they might be learning more in depth about the culture, and community service working alongside and shoulder to shoulder with the locals. So those are the wide range of trips. They range in cost from earning money on Workaway or a job site, to those that I recommended where you get room and board and then you get a stipend at the end, to those where you just pay for your travel and then you get room and board in exchange for volunteering, say on a farm or a garden, to those where you're paying outright for the full experience, from 3 months, and there are 3 programs that run 7 to 9 months. So you can go that length as well.
Wow, that's amazing. So does a student need to already have, be multilingual to do something like this?
It's certainly useful if you've studied French, Spanish, Mandarin, or German, and especially if you want to go into that country and improve your language. But I have found that students are very, very willing to, say they studied French in high school, but they want to do a gap program down in South America or Central America. Usually their ear, which has learned another language, is more in tune with picking up the greetings or the basics of another language. So I would say no, that's not a prerequisite, but it certainly is helpful to have that.
Excellent. So what kinds of students are best suited for this kind of gap year? What would you recommend to families who are trying to decide if their teen should travel or if they should stay home and maybe work or something like that?
So if you were to ask me, is there an ideal student? These are things that I look for: somebody who's really curious and open-minded, who's flexible, and really important to be able to let go of their preconceived prejudices or notions about a culture or about a certain ethnic group, to be able to have those rearranged or look at those when they're in country, to be able to learn about themselves, to not be so rigid that they can't say, oh, that's not my fault or that's not my issue. Super important, because I think during the gap experience, it's a real opportunity to learn your boundaries, where you are vulnerable, and also that it's okay to fail or to trip and fall and get back up, because I think it's super important to build that resilience in our young leaders. That resilience, as you and I well know, and all the adults listening to this, there are going to be some hard curveballs that life's going to throw you. And the more resilience that they have, that inner strength, the better able they will be able to cope with that. But I think also it's important if they are community service minded, if they want to do a volunteer program, or perhaps if they're intent on learning a language. Those are all things that just things that I look for. But I think also all the GAP program advisors go by, it's called the EEC, Essential Eligibility Criteria. And that means that we were looking at sort of the physical, mental, and emotional well-being of a student. Can they handle the challenges that a GAP experience might present, such as a student cannot have tried to commit suicide within a year before doing a gap experience, or they cannot be an extreme bipolar, have that condition. Are they able to take their medications independently? Many have ADD, ADHD, anxiety, those type of things. But if they can show and they have been able to medicate themselves independently, reliably, and are not going to decide that the GAP program time is when they're going to go off those meds, that is super important as well. Also, can they handle traveling for long periods of time, whether that be on a plane all the way to Nepal, whether that be riding a camel, whether that be sitting in a bush taxi in Africa for 8 hours, or perhaps a long bus ride in Ecuador. Can they handle that? Can they handle different food? Are they going to have an anxiety attack because they can't understand the language? They're living in a homestay family. It's an uncomfortable environment because it's humid or there are spiders. Those type of things we're all looking at to see if they can handle that themselves. Can they handle the stress, or will it trigger a panic attack with them? So those are all really, really important things. I think it's important too that they are able to abide by the cultural norms within a culture. For example, in a Muslim country, women are asked to cover their arms as well as to wear skirts down to their ankles, just out of respect for that culture. And if they can't abide by that, then it's probably not a good match. And also, can they work within a group? Especially students that want a social cohort, want to be in a group with 12 to 14 others. Can they respect differences with the group? Can they be a team player and be willing to compromise? Can they watch all their belongings? Can they show up on time? all those type of things that we just take for granted as kind of basics, that by senior year, probably most everybody can do this. But those are things that are really important to be able to prepare a student to take a gap experience.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us today. This is going to be really helpful for families to figure out what they want to do and have some really valuable tools that they can use to make that decision with their child. So I really appreciate that. Before we wrap up today, you have a free gift for us. Would you like to tell us about it?
Sure. I invite anyone who's been listening to this webinar to contact me on my website directly and inform me that you were a listener on Emma B. Perez's Micro Summit, Empower the Teen. And I will provide a 30-minute initial free consult. And then after that, I will provide a 30 to 45-minute follow-up when we get down to the brass tacks of gap year planning.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much for that. We really appreciate it. All right. Well, thank you, and let's talk again soon.
Okay. Thanks, Emma.